Welcome, boys and girls. Costin here with my Vampire Counts unit tier list for Total War Warhammer 3. Vampire Counts do have a unique recruitment situation in that not only can they recruit plenty of units instantly through the Raise Dead mechanic, they can also recruit high-end units fairly early on in a campaign, to the point that you might ruin your entire economy in the process. But that kind of recruitment capability gives them a level of variety for their armies that other races do lack. The only race that comes close, and even then not fully, are Warriors of Chaos, but even then, Warriors of Chaos do have limitations on this. Whereas with the Vampire Counts, you can get something like a Terrorgheist relatively quickly in your campaign, dependent on what your luck is. So with that in mind, let's start with the humble zombies. I'm going to put them in C tier. Now, as a unit, from a statistic standpoint, baseline stats standpoint, they're definitely an F tier unit. But there's quite a few caveats to that. First off, they're incredibly cheap as a unit. In fact, I think they're the cheapest unit in the entire game to recruit. Two, you are going to get more zombies than any other unit, probably all other units combined, through Raise Dead in a Vampire Counts campaign. So if you just want to recruit an army very quickly, then chances are you're probably going to want to get a bunch of zombies in them. And then on top of that, with Gorst, you have significant upgrades that make zombies ridiculously strong. And even for the other Vampire Counts Legendary Lords, there are research technologies that do benefit zombies quite a bit. And given the way the research tree works for Vampire Counts, you're kind of incentivized to a certain extent to actually get those upgrades once you get the campaign benefits, especially in terms of diplomacy. So while zombies are not a unit that you always want to recruit, you will be forced to do so, either for economic reasons or lack of other options in your campaign. Basically, the way to view zombies is if you can recruit anything else, you should recruit everything else. But chances are you're probably going to end up in a lot of situations where recruiting zombies is really the thing you want to do or are forced to do. Then we have Skeletal Warriors, definitely an F tier unit, not a great line holder, not a great combat unit. Sure, there's quite a few of them, but they don't have the same benefits as zombies. Like, zombies can get strong, especially if you somehow manage to confederate Gorst, whereas Skeletal Warriors will always remain a pretty bad unit. There's going to be quite a few of them, but nowhere near as many as zombies, so you can't even rely on an entire army of them in a campaign situation. Then we have Skeletal Spearmen. These are the units that you want to recruit. Of course, again, similar situation as with other units. You recruit these guys if you have nothing else, but they are good enough, I guess, at holding a line against flanking attacks and just in general. These are the guys that you actually want to use as very early game infantry until you replace them with Graveguard. Then we have Crypt Ghouls. So with Crypt Ghouls, they can do some decent level of damage, but here's the thing. When you're playing a Vampire Counts army battle, a lot of the times, be it in sieges or in field battles, you're going to depend on the lords and heroes carrying the day. It's generally speaking the best strategy, or then a couple of elite units carrying the day. And as a result of that, the other units you want to have in your army are ones that can hold a line or at least survive for some length of time. Crypt Ghouls do not have that kind of capability, not even as much as zombies or skeletal spearmen. So they're not really worth it. Yes, they can get a bunch of upgrades, but again, not really worth it in Strigoi. Just pretty much never worth really investing in a campaign. Then we have Crypt Horrors. Gonna put them in B tier. I think Crypt Horrors, as a kind of monstrous unit, they can be useful sometimes, though they can also be a big target, but they can help shore up your line if you're engaging against an opponent where you might want to play a bit defensively, or you can use them aggressively. They're essentially the equivalent of trolls for the vampire counts. They're not as good as stone trolls or chaos armor trolls, far from it, but all the same, they do get the job done. Not a unit you necessarily want to invest too much in, but you may want to have like a couple of units of these guys in your armies. Then we have Vargulf's big, monstrous unit, single entity. Though, unlike, say, giants, these guys benefit from the fact that they're not as tall as giants, and they're quite a bit faster than that. They're good in terms of breaking a line, they're good in sieges, from, breaking down gates, to being able to just get stuck in and survive and do quite a bit of damage against enemy forces in a battle situation. Not quite an S tier unit, but still a unit that you almost always want to get in a Vampire Counts campaign. Not too many of them. Again, not too many of them. You don't want to make them the mainstay of your army. But still, something that really works well with the Lord and hero focus that the Vampire Counts do have in their armies. Then we have Vargheists, S tier unit, without a doubt, in my mind. The reasoning behind it is that Vargheists are fast, they're quite combat effective for a flying unit. In fact, from the perspective of a flying melee unit, they might be some of the best in the game, with the exception of course, single entities. I mean, sure, you have Screamers, you have some other units that are available in the game, but they are definitely a very effective unit, and for the Vampire Counts in particular, they can neutralize a lot of the enemy artillery and range units, just swoop in, deal a lot of damage, get out. That's actually quite an important point. Just being able to go in, do damage, get out, good in sieges, closing that gap, harassing enemy range units, harassing enemy artillery. They can win against many different targets in a battle, and if they're not, well, let's just put it like this, you can always run away. Then we have Morghuls. I'm going to say Morghuls are a B tier unit. And just gonna point this out, when I do these tier lists, I will say that every unit that's between S and B is at some points in a campaign worth recruiting. C and D are situational, and F is pretty much never worth recruiting unless you have no other option. Morghuls, they can be decently effective in a battle, but they do have their weaknesses as, ghost units, so to speak, in a battle situation. And ghosts, those kind of units that have lower durability but make it up with physical resistance, can work sometimes, like weaker against range. I would say, generally speaking, the situation, like you don't want them to get shot at, but they can hold their own decently well in a melee situation, close the gap, etc. Then we have Fellbats. One shouldn't underestimate the Fellbats. Like, you can get a lot of these. They're very cheap, and they can harass enemy artillery and to an extent range units. They're not going to win against range units, but here's the one benefit of Hellbats when you combine it with the Raise Dead mechanic. In a lot of situations, with virtually every other race, you don't want to go for that playstyle of like, I know I'm going to lose these units in battle. Economically, it can hurt you, but Fellbats are cheap enough, effective enough, and plentiful enough for the Raise Dead mechanic that they're genuinely disposable units that you can use in a battle situation. I'm just going to put them in D tier, partly because, Vargheist exists. If Vargheist didn't exist, I'd probably rank them higher just for that flying capability, but Vargheist do exist. Fellbats can support Vargheist or can do their own thing in a battle. Most of the time, you don't want to recruit them if you have other options, but it's not a bad idea to have a couple of units of Fellbats in a campaign. Then we in an army. Then we have Direwolves. I'm going to put these guys also in B tier. There's a lot of different upgrades. You look at Isabella, for instance. She can get a bunch of upgrades for Direwolves through her skill line. Direwolves are honestly the best wolf units in the game. They're combat effective enough, they're fast enough, they can cause quite a bit of damage. One of the issues that you may have with Vampire Counts armies is just having a fast-moving flanking unit, or just any kind of unit that could do a good amount of damage. They're more expensive than some other units, and obviously later on you don't want to use them as you start getting more and more cavalry. But all the same, direwolves definitely useful, especially against range centric foes. They'll close that gap. They'll do a lot of damage. They'll force the opponent to make choices that they may not want to make. Then we have Mortis Engine. So normally I would not put a unit that's this high tier in S tier, but again, remember how vampire counts work in terms of the recruitment. Mortis engines are just great. They do a lot of buffs. They can be effective on the battlefield. They support your army. They hurt the enemy. So definitely a unit that's almost always worth recruiting to help your army out. Though you want to keep Mortis engines close to your troops. That's kind of one of the limitations of these type of chariot units that the vampire counts to have, because they're all chariot units. Corpse cards, black coaches, Mortis engines, they should all be counted as chariot units. Speaking about chariots, we have black coaches, 8-tier unit. Now, black coaches, unlike Mortis engines, like Mortis engines, you're far better off keeping them close to your army, whereas black coaches can just go around and do their own thing and be quite effective at that, at harassing the enemy, breaking their lines, hurting their range units. They can go in and out, and they're trickier to pin down than you might imagine. They're fast, they can do a lot of damage, they get stronger the more kills they get. So definitely a unit that is worth getting for the sake of field battles. Then we have the corpse cards, all of the versions. They do provide different buffs and debuffs depending on the version you're talking about, different benefits in a battle situation. I'm just going to put them in B tier. Basically, you may want to use some of these variants dependent on what you're facing. You're not going to be making a wrong choice if you have the healing version of a corpse card. But most of the time, their staying power in terms of keeping them in a campaign army is going to come down to, can I get a Mortis engine or Black Coach, or can I get Corpse Card? If you can get Black Coaches and Mortis engines, you're better off doing so. So that's the reason they're not higher on this list. But all the same, still, they do the job they're meant to do, which is to support your armies. Next up, we have Blood Knights. So Blood Knights with lances, absolutely an S tier unit in a campaign. They're the best cavalry unit you have overall. They're quite dangerous. They're a good anti-cav unit. They have a bunch. They synergize well with support from your lords and heroes. Healing capability, all of that. They are quite very effective in a battle situation, and unlike many other elite units they have in the game, elite cavalry units or elite units in general, with Blood Dragons, you can also reduce their upkeep by quite a bit. Then we have Blood Knights, regular ones. I'm going to say that these guys are A tier, so they don't have that kind of anti-large benefit. They don't have the same, damage dealing capability or shock cavalry capability. They're more of a line holder cavalry unit. And generally speaking, from my perspective, when you are looking at cavalry, I tend to prefer having a cavalry units in a campaign situation. Multiplayer, I imagine it's a very different affair. But in a campaign situation, it's just better to have units, cavalry units that are doing that shock cavalry role, unless they're something like, questing knights. That's a kind, or warbear riders. Those are some exceptions, or skull crushers, if you will. But I just don't think they have the same kind of usefulness as regular blood knights. Then we have Cairn Wraiths. So I'm going to put these guys also in B tier. They're okay as infantry units. They obviously ghost units, lacking armor, but making it up with physical resistance. That is problematic in some ways because you are going to suffer in terms of auto resolve. You're going to suffer against specific opponents, but you're going to do well against other opponents. The way I would view them is you don't want to get them shot out at, or you don't want to have them deal with magical attacks because that's going to make them very vulnerable. At the same time, they can be pretty okay in a pure melee situation against most units that you encounter in a campaign. Then we have the Wraith Cavalry units. Also B tier. Can be useful sometimes, can be useless other times. When I'm looking at cavalry units, I want a level of durability. These guys can have it in some situations, may not have it in other situation, but obviously, capability of closing the gap, damage dealing capability, it's all there. I just prefer using other cavalry units if I have the opportunity to do so. Black Knights, regular Black Knights, I'm gonna put them C tier. They're not a terrible cavalry unit, far from it. It's just they get overshadowed by all the others that you do have, and it's easy enough to actually get those other versions that are just flat out better. Because we do have Black Knights with Barding. And Black Knights with Barding, they're not Blood Knights, but they're still quite a pretty solid cavalry unit that you do want to use. Like, surprisingly, vampire counts do have a lot of good cavalry units, or pretty decent cavalry units available in their campaigns. So you don't want to get regular Black Knights. If you can get Black Knights with Barding, they're just going to be far more effective in a combat situation as a cav unit in terms of just closing that gap, harassing the enemy, breaking their lines, and making life miserable for them. Then we have Graveguard. So regular Graveguard, shield, decent level of survivability. In fact, the most survivable infantry unit that you have, or pure melee unit that you do have, with the exception of cavalry, in a Vampire Counts campaign, at least against enemy ranged and, artillery, because of their shield capability. Obviously, they don't have the damage dealing capability, and they're not as good as elite infantry. Well, they're not elite infantry units. They're mid-game infantry units. So when you're looking at elite infantry, you're looking at Chosen, you're looking at things like Terrorgheist, for instance. If you want to talk about better infantry units, these guys are not going to compare to Terrorgheist. Hell, or even cast warriors with dual weapons or with gray weapons, but they are effective enough line holders, and they allow your lords and heroes to get the job done without dying very quickly. The one downside of undead armies has to really do with the fact that units don't rout, they disintegrate, and that is a significant downside that they deal with, because otherwise things like Graveguard or a lot of different units would be far more effective if they could run and you could preserve them and ensure you preserve them. These are not disposable units that you can just throw around willy-nilly. But then we have Graveguard with gray weapons. So the reason I'm going to put these guys in S tier is one of the problems you have in a Vampire Counts campaign is sieges. So a lot of the times, many of the units you have as part of your roster either don't have the durability or the damage dealing capability to just throw them through a broken gate, because you don't have ways of destroying walls and just killing a lot of things in sight. These guys can, not against everything. Keep in mind, elite infantry units will still win, like Chosen will still beat them. Gas warriors with great weapons will still beat them. But they are good against most targets you'd be dealing with, and then you have to consider the fact that you would throw them in conjunction with a lord, hero, maybe some other units that support them, buff them up. Then we have Graveguard with halberds. So Graveguard with halberds, basically your ultimate line holder in a battle situation, against cavalry, or just in general a line holder. Obviously, they're vulnerable against ranged, but they will hold a line quite effectively against the vast majority of targets. So if you want to protect your flanks against enemy fast movers, these are the guys you want to use. Like, a lot of the times, the situation in a Vampire Counts campaign becomes, okay, how many Graveguard can I afford? Because they can be costly, and you can definitely outpace your economy. You will get a decent amount of them from battles, especially if you're fighting large-scale battles on higher difficulties. You'll get a decent amount of them, but you may not have enough money to support as many as you'd want. And then we have Terrorgheists. So a big flying dragon that's kind of okay, but not especially great. I'm just gonna say that Terrorgheist are in C tier. First off, they're the one unit that you're gonna actually struggle to get. Like, you can play a lot of Vampire Counts campaign and get Blood Knights, Black Knights with Barding, regular Black Knights, Graveguard, etc. But Terrorgeists are fairly rare, and from a combat capability, well, I personally prefer the faster speed of our guys. I think that kind of flexibility. Big single entities have their own problems in a campaign, unless they're Star Dragons or Black Dragons who are very effective at just basically killing a lot of units on their own. Terrorgeists don't quite have that same level of effectiveness in a campaign battle. Still, they're a big single entity, so if you want a big flying single entity, they're your choice, but most of the time, I wouldn't really prioritize getting them. And that is all I had to say. Costin here signing out. Stay tuned for more. Hope you all enjoyed this, and if you have anything to say, please let me know. I'll see you next time.